All right, folks. Well, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune, because it's time for another week of the RecPoker podcast. I'm your host, Jim Reid, Bluffsterini in the home game, and at RecPoker Jim on the hellscape we call Twitter. And I have the best freaking job in the world, talking poker with my friends here on the Strategy Forums edition of the podcast every Monday night while we steal each other's chips in the free nightly home game. Now, I have to mention that we're brought to you by Running Aces, the official sponsor of the RecPoker podcast. It's located less than an hour north of the Twin Cities in the beautiful state of Minnesota. And you can find out more about them at runaces.com. And it's important that I shout out our sponsors because most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization. So we depend on the support of our sponsors and from our premium members who take part in our training material and study opportunities for only $22 a month. And I think if you want to give us a try, you can always get your first month of premium membership at RecPoker for only $5 by using the code RecPoker at checkout. And of course, you can always sign up for our free membership, a community account at RecPoker. All that we require from you is an email address and a smile, although we do insist on both. And we have a lot of great free resources for recreational poker players as well. And I should also point out, in case you don't know, we like to support local food banks here on the show. And so if $22 a month or even $5 a month is too much for you, we will reward you with a free month of premium membership here if you send us a screenshot or a receipt of a donation to a local food bank of any amount. So if you want to be a RecPoker premium member and only have $1, donate that dollar to a local food bank. Send us the evidence of that donation, and we'll make sure to set you up with a free month here at RecPoker, because it's just one way that we get to make the world a better place, not just the poker world, but the world at large. And we're lucky enough to be able to do it. So, okay, that's a lot. You've heard from me a few times. They let me host the show on Monday, but I am just one man, one small cog in the RecPoker machine. It takes a group, a gang, a crew to make all the magic happen around here. We call this group of wizards the RECing Crew. And if you want to learn more about me or the rest of the crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or you can just listen up because you're going to meet a few of them right here on the air, starting with producing co-host Chris Jones.
Well, I am Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 in the Poker Stars home game. And I help run our monthly deep dive strategy segment. And we have been going over player exploits. We've been looking at different types of player types and how we might approach playing them differently over the past few months. And I am excited to announce here that in the month of August, our deep dive is going to be kind of extending off our subject for this show, where we're going to be talking about Jim's main event run, which if you don't know, he had a very deep main event run, which we'll talk about shortly. And we're going to be talking about some of the ways in which he approached different exploits during that tournament.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm PetVet33 on social platforms. I'm Fergie56 in the home game. And I run a hand history review once a month on the second Wednesday of the month.
And I'm Rob Washam. You can find me as Rabman50 just about anywhere. And I run a book study group on the first and third Wednesdays of every month. Come join us and learn about what all the pros are putting in their books these days.
That's right. So yeah, just a little taster's choice of a few of the different RECing Crew members and how they contribute to our premium membership here at RecPoker. We've got a lot going on, and I'd encourage you all to join up and come along. Speaking of joining up and coming along, yeah, so Chris kind of teased it at the top there. This episode will come out in the first week of August. We're recording this mid-July, just after I got home from playing in the World Series of Poker. I always like to go down in June and play in some smaller bracelet events. It's the highlight of my year. There is no greater pleasure or excitement as a poker player than competing for a World Series of Poker bracelet. And I mean, sometimes we even get to shoot our shot and play in the main event. One of the most prestigious poker tournaments in the world. It costs $10,000 to enter. It's got 2-hour levels, the luxury of which can hardly be expressed. And it's kind of like the World Series of poker. It's the Super Bowl of poker. A lot of mythical stature is assigned to this main event of the World Series of Poker. And it's part of that's because so many recreational players get to satellite into it or get sent by home game clubs or that sort of thing. And so it's a very exciting field to play in. It's playing at stakes that some of us will never play in again. And at the same time, you're playing with some of the best players in the world, and you're playing with a lot of people who really have no business playing in a $10,000 poker tournament of, like I say, satellite winners and people that are like crossing off a bucket list item that might be excellent poker players, in their own right, but they're not at the level that you would typically find in a $10,000 poker tournament. And I am one of those people. So I'm joined by 3 others. So I'm happy to report we were talking about how to handle this episode of the Forums edition. We're going to talk a little bit about my experience playing in the main this year, having a pretty good finish. I went pretty deep in it. 1 part skill, 5 parts luck, mostly just being in the right place at the right time. But I did make some good plays. I did make some kind of savvy diversions from, our typical textbook play. And I'm joined by Rob Washam, Chris Jones, and Kim Kilroy, who have all also played in the main event. So we're all recreational players, but by hook or by crook, we've managed to find a way to compete in this ultimate of poker tournaments. And so we kind of have some insight into how to approach it, how other people approach it, and the trials and tribulations that we've experienced going into it. So I've got a few sort of thoughts on approaching it. I guess I'll just, if our audience doesn't know, so I decided very last minute to play. I had put a staking package together for some smaller events over the summer. And even though I hadn't had a great amount of success, I'd still only been firing 1 bullet per event. And so I had more money set aside for second bullets and rebuys, and I hadn't needed it. And so I decided to see if I could roll that into a main event seat by getting some action sold to other folks, and to see if I could lower my own entry cost. And so I put it out on Twitter. And about 24 hours later, I had said, hey, I'm interested in playing in the main event. Who wants to have a piece and put me in? Over the course of the next day and a half, 35 different people had all decided to pledge between $20 for 0.2% of my action, up to we had a few people with like 3% or 5%, 1 person with 7%. But most people were in there for 1% or 2% for $100 or for $200. And we ended up raising enough for me to sell almost 68% of my action, which is amazing. So with an average a percentage of about 2%, these 35 people came along for the ride and took a shot on me and gave me a chance to play in the main. And I'm so grateful for this fantastic group. And as it turned out, I was able to do pretty well and provide a positive return for all these folks that came along for the ride. So that was great. So, I mean, I'm tempted just to start by sort of talking about what my going in mentality was. And then maybe we can sort of talk about your own experiences in the main and kind of how we handled certain aspects of it. So I'd played once before, and I busted in the last hour of day 2. And so I didn't make the money. I didn't make day 3, but I did bag day 1. I did, have the whole experience of getting to play a couple days with the 2-hour levels. And I felt much more comfortable playing for the second time, knowing what that was going to feel like, and having done it before. And it was important. I really did not want to bust day 1. It's a false bubble. It doesn't really make sense if you bust on day 1 or day 2 or day 3. You don't make the money until day 4. But I just didn't want to bust on day 1. Kim, you unmuted there. What's your perspective?
Yeah. Did you start at the beginning of the day 1?
I did.
Or did you at all late register?
I considered late registering, because at the very beginning of my first day when I played the main a couple of years ago, there were only 4 people at the table, and we ended up playing the first like 40 minutes 4-handed and 5-handed, which isn't my preferred way to play. And so I was a little out of my comfort zone, and I thought about late registering to kind of avoid that. And I even considered coming in on day 2 with 75 big blinds, because a lot of players that make day 2 do it with fewer than 60,000 starting chips, which is the starting stack. And I was no exception. In both times I've played the main, I've gone into day 2 with fewer than 60,000 chips. And
which day 1 did you choose to play?
This year I played 1D. In a vacuum, I would have chosen to play 1C, because then you get a day off before day 2. And then you also get a day off between day 2 and day 3. And those matter when it comes to rest and reserves and focus and that kind of thing. But honestly, I decided to do it so late that I ran out of time, and like I couldn't register until day 1D because it took me that long to like get my stuff together.
I have a very subjective take on that, and that is that I think the softest field is day 1D.
Yeah.
I think that has the most last minute satellite players in, the most last minute getting my 10K together people in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just watching all of the day 1's coverage, I feel it was the softest, with the least sort of pros at every table kind of feeling out there.
I've heard that.
Another aspect of that is some people have to take off work to do this, right?
Right.
So by coming in day 1A means you have to take off like 4 or 5 extra days. So if there's, if you're a working guy and whatnot, you can't necessarily afford to take those. So 1D is a good spot to, register at the main event, because you're not wasting any days in between.
Yeah. And it tends to be the largest field. There's always more people in, like our day 1D had, I think, over 5,000 entrants, which is over half the total entrants for the tournament. So days 1, 2, and 3 also added up cumulatively. Days A1, A, B, and C to the other 5,000. But it was, and so there's always some risk that you're going to run 10-handed as well on 1D if they don't have enough dealers or enough tables set up or that sort of thing, and they have to fit those extra people in. We played 9-handed and it wasn't a problem at all. So we didn't have to deal with that. But I think I have heard that 1D, because it has a lot of these players that, are either scrambling to get together, or they're recreational players who have day jobs who have to take off as little time as possible, does make it for a softer field. And
I just think from the sheer numbers as well, that we just have more Recs to pros.
Yeah.
Just from the sheer number.
I think that makes sense. Your table draw matters a lot.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, what day did you play, Kim?
I have played 3 times. 3 or 4 times. And I don't remember every year. I'd have to go back and look, but mostly on the last flight.
Yeah. Okay. Chris?
I think the last time I played on the second last flight because I had a conflict on the last flight. So.
Chris, do you remember?
Well, I played 1C. I'm kind of I agree with Kim's assessment that you're gonna run into them, but there's still it's still all about the luck of the table draw too.
Yeah,
because there's going to be some killers on day 1D, and you can't. I mean, like you see the featured table on day 1D, and it's like, well, that table sucks. Like, so I mean, you're gonna run into those sometimes. And I think that day of rest thing is pretty amazing to get 2 of those days to like sort of build yourself up if you are going to make a deep run. And honestly, I don't know, like the experience level, if it's your first main, I've only played 1 main event. I hope to play again, maybe next year. And I think the first time you got to just soak it in, probably play from the start, kind of do the whole thing. But I'm thinking I might be one of the day 2 people. If I play it again, like that just feels really, really appealing to me.
you really have to, like, it's not, you're not likely, especially if you're listening to this podcast, you're not likely to be able to outplay everyone at your table deep stacked on day one enough to bring extra chips into day two. And if you're just as likely to get that setup deck on day two as you are on day one. And when you start with 75 big blinds, it's 75 big blinds for 2 hours. And then it's 2 hours of 60 big blinds. And so like you have a lot of time to get cards, to make hands, to develop player profiles. And it's really completely different from any other tournament structure you've ever played. I think I agree with you 100%, Chris. If you're playing for the first time, get in on day one, enjoy that experience. But I'm tempted to play it again, needless to say, and I'm definitely leaning towards playing on day two ABC.
The other sort of like sneaky way to do this is to like show up at like the beer level of like level 6 of or level 5 of day one, where you just like slide in the last hour, play a few hands and then like put it in the bag.
I begged
day one.
I begged a starting stack.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate here, because who are we? We are recreational players. Why are we playing poker? Because we love the game and we want to play poker.
Yeah.
Why would we want to miss a whole day of playing the best event in the world?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. I love it, Jim.
True.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Fair.
And that's the tension, right? Because as a recreational player, it's like we need to decide, what are we going to prioritize here? Playing on day one, you get the most play. You get the most time playing in the main event. But starting on day two, I mean, roughly a quarter or to a third of the field has already been eliminated by the time that you start. And so you're not like, you didn't get bad beated out of it earlier. Now, if you get a bad beat at the start of day two, it's like you may as well have anyway. But and also, when you come in with like 60 to 75 big blinds, that takes away a skill edge from the most experienced opponents, who are going to be better than you at playing 200 big blind, 300 big blind poker. You're going to make bigger mistakes than they are with those deeper stacks behind on day one. So there is an argument for increasing your EV in the tournament, even as a less experienced player, by coming in on day two. But, says Rob,
but you're not going to run into as many of those players on day one as you are on day two.
Great point.
On day one, that's when, no matter what day one you come into, that's when at the beginning of the tournament, that's when the most inexperienced players are there.
True.
So that really, as in my experience, my table on day one, I stayed on that table all day. There was some killers on the table, no doubt, but I had so much fun. It was just such a fun table. Everybody was talking. It was just a good time. Now, day two, I got onto a must-move table or something. I ended up moving twice by the afternoon in day two.
Yeah.
And my first table wasn't too bad. My second table was a bunch of headphones, sunglass-wearing people that didn't open their mouths. And my third table was just as bad. And so it was like really, really depressing. It wasn't fun anymore.
Yeah.
It was like, these guys are way too serious. Where on day one, even though I was sitting with Jason Mercier and Mustafa Kanit at my table, we were having a great time. It was just so much fun. And then you get these guys that are too serious. And, I want to know about that experience for you. What did you ever come into that kind of experience where everything was going great? It's a fun table. It doesn't matter how good the poker is. Everybody's just having fun and talking and having a good time.
If Jim was at the table, I'm sure I can guarantee it was a fun table.
I would hope so. I would hope so. Yes.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that, because the table draw matters a lot. And you can, whatever size field you're in, you're only playing against those other 8 players at the table. So my day one table that I was at for almost the entirety of day one was no one famous, but just a bunch of obviously professional tournament players, people that were like down betting all the time post flop and like knew exactly the right size to bet on every different board texture and like knew when to raise high frequency C bet spots, and like their sizing was perfect and they never made one little spew. It was really annoying, guys. This was not a fun table, and it was relatively jovial. But like no one was limping. No one was like 3xing pre-flop. No one was making raises that were too big or too small. It was just like, I was kind of intimidated as a player a bit, because I was like, I am probably the least skilled person at this table. And I was hoping on day one to at least get a few soft seats at the table, but I was definitely the softest seat there. So I played very defensive. Yeah.
It's interesting that you picked up though. You picked up what type of table you were at.
Yes.
So you know enough to know when the competition is at whatever level they are. So that's good. That's definitely good.
It helped. It helped minimize the losses a little, because I was definitely playing defensively. I was playing tight pre-flop ranges. I was, and because stacks were deep, I was in a position where it's like, okay, getting into hands post-flop, I need to play in such a way that I'm not creating big pots out of position. Maybe I have to take a street off of medium value hands, because I don't want to give these excellent players a chance to recognize that my range is capped on this turn and bomb away at 2x pot and put me in a terrible position. So it was a lot of small ball defensive. Let's make hands, let's check call, let's bet side, let's use our sizes well. And so, of course, I had a very, like tight image, which matters. Like using your image matters a lot, for sure.
Well, and
Jim,
when you're that,
go ahead, Jim.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, when you're that deep, you don't want to blow.
Right.
I mean, you absolutely don't want to blow at the pot. So you were playing well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say to our listeners out there that are contemplating playing the main event, that's the best way to play day one. Is using when you have 2-hour levels, you should be playing a tight range.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what a lot of people don't understand is when you're deep stacked, they feel like they got so many chips, they can just throw them around and have fun. But when you're deep stacked, if you look at all of the solvers outputs, all of the pre-flop ranges, you're actually playing much tighter than you would at a 50 or 60 big blind stack.
Yeah. Yeah. Because having the nuts is really important in big pots on future streets, or being able to have the nuts. And so it's a very different dynamic. So I actually went into day two with, instead of the starting stack of 60,000, I had 30,500. And like I had spent all day whittling my stack down to half. And I got it up to 70.
Good man.
I got it up to 71K in the first few orbits, because I was making hands. I was flopping sets, making top pair, top kicker. And then I just got like no hands for 5 hours. And I went from 71,000 down to like 50,000. And then I just tried one little bluff, guys. Just one little bluff out of position. I squeezed with ace-6 of clubs out of the small blind, thinking I'd get some folds with some tight image, and the board did not come with clubs, unfortunately. And I tried to take it away anyway with a little bet, but they called, and like I ended up losing. So that got me down to about 30,000. That's where I finished the night. But my first, and then they broke our table with half an hour to go. And I moved over to this other table, and I had like my shot glass in one hand with my chips and a beer cup in the other. And I sat down at the other table, and everyone had a beer in front of them, and they were all laughing. They're like, "Oh, look at this guy with the shot glass!" And like, we did the hot dog a sandwich question thing there, and like, man, why couldn't I just be playing at this table all day? They were having a great time. They were getting it in, wide, and like it was and like it made a huge difference to how I played, to how I approached different opponents, to like my opening range. I was 3-betting more. Like, it was just a completely different. So like you really have to just play the table that you're at, and you have chips to do it. There were other spots where I was at, really fun tables. And then there was the time that I was at Adrian Mateus's table, along with Adam Friedman, bracelet winner, a couple other.
Photo was was that also Antoine Saout? Was he at that table
so.
too?
Yeah.
Oh my God! I mean, that table was just insane.
They put me at that table at the end of day 4, so we'd already made the money at that point. And I think I played my last 3 hours at that table of day 4. And I'm not exaggerating. I voluntarily put money in on 2 hands in that last entire period. Chris, one of them was calling with pocket 5s. I wanted to see a flop with pocket 5s. Did not improve, but we had a good time.
Well, okay.
And then the only other hand was I open shoved my last 9 big blinds with ace queen. And I was like, just think it's aces, guys. Just fold. Like, I just want to pick up the blinds here. And they did, because they'd only seen me play 1 hand in 3 hours. And so
you must have had aces then, right?
Must have had aces. And so I even tweeted out, I was like, guys, I snuck a bluff through with ace queen suited. They bought it. Oh, those fools. So like that, I was just like total defense. Just like, I just wanted to make it day 5.
And
like
that was also, I think, if I remember, like Adrian Mateos was like the chip leader of the whole tournament, right?
He had
he had like a pile, right? Yeah,
he had a ton.
That's tough when you got like one of the 5 best players in the world and they have like 200 big blinds.
Yeah.
I was about to say, I think Adrian might be the best player in the world.
Right,
I don't know.
right.
He's really freaking good.
And it was a crazy environment because there were 3 different camera crews set up for him and a couple other players at that table. So like everything you're doing, you're going to be in like the B-roll, or like there's a camera right here behind you taking a shot of it. And it was and it was a very tense table. It was like the energy sucked. Everyone was completely quiet and intense and stressed and like not saying a word. And so literally for 2 hours, it was like pulling teeth. And so I intentionally deployed the hot dog sandwich debate. And I like told people it was coming on Twitter. I was like, all right, guys, we got to do something to change the energy here. And so I started with a show of hands just to see like who was in the pro hot dog, who was in the anti hot dog camp. And it actually got some smiles and a couple people laughed. And all of a sudden it was like, we're still playing excellent poker and we all want to kill each other, but we're like having a little more fun with it. And then like a new person would come to the table and I'd look at the rest of the table and wink and be like, so there's just this one question we have to ask you as the new member here. And all the rest of the table would be like, oh God, no, not the hot dog thing. But you could tell it was like this thing that had broken the ice, and that and it really did make a difference. And I feel like the table was like more pleasant to play at. But the next day, day 5, I was also at a table with a bunch of killers, just high stakes cash players, people that had made it to the final table of the main event before. But it was a very friendly, outgoing, fun, giving each other attitude, cheering each other on. The caliber of play was really high, but we also had a really fun time that entire day. And so it goes to show, like, even the best players in the world, like, you can actually still have fun playing poker. It's just, you have to bring some intentionality to it. Like, it's not just going to happen by accident, but it is available there. So I really enjoyed that. But yeah, I played very defensively because from the end of day 1, I very rarely had more than 30 big blinds ever. And so
it seems like from that point on, you also had pretty tough table draw. I mean, I guess the whole main event is littered with all the best players in the world, but there are different table draws where you don't. Yeah. I mean, like you had Dietrich Fast on your left. You had these. I mean, so you had some tough tables.
Yeah.
Did you have any soft tables?
No, I had a couple tables where, like, I think I had 2 tables where I could tell that at least one other player was not a professional. I had one table where there was one player who had a limping range and a 3.5x opening range.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, let me get in some pots with you, sir. And then there was one other table with someone who had talked about coming in as a satellite, and they were a little clumsy with their chips, and they weren't an experienced player. But other than that, like, there were no soft seats. And it was, yeah, it felt like a lot of, honestly, guys, I only advanced as far as I did. Like, I played a few hands well here and there, but mostly I just made hands when I needed to make hands, and I got paid. And I chose good spots to shove and get called, and I chose good spots to shove and not get called. And
Well, I mean, the other thing that I think you did, because and just observer on Twitter, and maybe we could talk about this hand a little, because it was a big deal. I think this is in day 5, the Ace Jack hand that I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Our good friend and podcast guest Matt Matros said, "Wow, I don't know that I could have made that fold." Which you did and survived. So let's set the stage. And what can you talk about that hand a little?
So day 5 opened. We'd all kind of moved to the smaller horseshoe room with all the big stages, and like it's the serious room. And we'd all locked up something like $20,000 already at that point, or $25,000 or something like that. But the pay jumps are still coming pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I started the day with 12 big blinds. And my Vegas roomie, Merv Harvey, and I had sort of like talked through, okay, so what can we expect the start of the day to be like? And I was like, okay, worst case scenario, I'm in the big blind and I have to pay 2 of my big blinds right up front for the big blind and the ante, and then the small blind. So worst case scenario, I'll have one orbit where I'm down to 9.5 big blinds, and then I'll have another orbit where I'm down to like 6 or 7 big blinds. And that's when I will start getting desperate to shove. Because when I get below 6 big blinds, like, you really don't have a lot of fold equity anymore at that point. And even with good hands, like, you're really just happy picking up the blinds in the ante. So my mindset was very, let's ladder up. I'm only going to take chances when I think it's really necessary. And Stewie Carriage has taught me, longtime premium member here at RecPoker, has taught me the value of that short stack and how to get the most out of it. So I this hand took place, I think, in like the second level of the day. I had gotten down to 6 big blinds. I'd stolen a couple. I think I was still, at this point, I'm on 7 big blinds 2 hours into the day. Or sorry, 3 hours into the day at second level. And everyone knows that I'm playing tight and trying to ladder up. I'm by far the tightest player at the table. One player opens in front, and I've already primed myself to shove now. I'm like, okay, I can't wait. I look down, I've got Ace Jack offsuit. I'm like, someone open in front so I can shove, and this is a good spot. Player opens in front. I'm getting ready to shove. The player to his left looks down at his cards and then looks over at me and then like eyeballs my stack a little and then looks back at their cards and then just smooth calls. And this sent like alarm bells going off in the back of my mind. And I'm normally like, I have a plan. I'm going to stick with my plan. And so many times I've just been like, well, here's my Ace Jack. I've got 7 big blinds. I'm sure I've got some equity. Let's see what God has in mind for us. But this guy, just that look at my stack, and like, it really got me thinking that he's trapping with a super premium hand. So I tanked for a long time, and no one called the clock. But they were like, "Listen, I'm not calling the clock, but it would be great if you made a decision here." And so I violently folded, and I was kind of like beating myself up for being a nit. It's like, even if he's got pocket kings, you've still got 30% equity or something. Like, there's 3 aces out there. But as it happened, they played out the hand and they got to showdown, and I got to see his hand, and he turned over pocket aces. And he looked at me and said, "What did you fold?" I was like, "I folded ace jack." He's like, "God damn it. I wanted you to shove so bad." And it was really like, I think it's one of the hands I'm most proud of, as silly as it sounds, just like folding ace jack to a raise. But I go broke there so often if this guy doesn't, if I'm not paying attention, if I could, like, if that first guy makes his open and I'm just like, okay, well, time to go all in, and I start looking at my chips or something like that, I mean, I go broke there every time. It's just something about the way that this guy looked at my stack allowed me to get away from it. But yeah, that one's going to stick with me for a long time, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great way of like talking about observing the table too, and just being present in your situation, and not, because like the charts would say, ace jack, it's just time. We got 7 bigs. Blinds are coming around. We don't have much fold equity anymore, but we do have still a little. I don't know, but yeah, that's a great. And then you were rewarded by getting some big pocket pair in the next couple of hands, right?
Basically, what happened. So I made it to the next blinds, and then I was in the big blind. I think for this one, I was in this. How'd it go? Yeah, I was in the small blind, and I looked down at pocket threes, and it folds to me. And so this is my last 4.5 big blinds now, because I had 7, and now I went through the big blind, and now I'm in the small blind because I folded the ace jack hand, and I shove pocket threes for my last 4.5 big blinds, and the player in the big blind calls with king queen offsuit, and this is, so I officially declared my one time. I was like, this one feels right. This is where I need the one-time dealer. Please note that the one-time's coming, which is good because they did hit a queen on the flop, but it ran out 4 clubs, and I was the only guy with the 3 of clubs, and so I managed to win that hand and double up. The next orbit, I'm in the small blind. No, the next orbit, I'm in the big blind. The player to my right shoves with ace 3. I've got pocket 7s and hold. So now I double up again. So now I've got like 16 big blinds or something like that. And then the very next hand, I get pocket aces. And I'm proud of this one too. This is one where I manipulated this other player with my language to shove. And so I say to the table, I look down at pocket aces and, like, my hand starts shaking. And I say to the table, like, wow, this is the first time I've had a chance to just make an open raise. Like, how about this? Look, I got a stack now. I can see a flop and like play some poker. So I raise minimum instead of shoving for the first time all day, which normally is a very strong look. Certainly like min raising off 8 big blinds or min raising off 10 big blinds. But I had just enough that it was like, oh, maybe he's actually min raising. And so we get a call from the button. And then the big blind, who's a very accomplished player, shoves with pocket 5s because they know A, how strong a hand that is, and
must
B,
be not that strong a player, I guess.
No. and you could tell that their thought was, this guy wants to see a flop. He has the kind of hand that wants to see a flop. He's open raising, so I'm going to deny him that ability. So he shoves all in, and I have to hum and haw a little because I really want the other guy to call.
Right.
But I do call, and the other guy folds. And it turns out, so he rolls over pocket 5s, and I turn over aces. And then we realize that I actually have him covered by like 15,000, like very, very little. And that he's actually put his tournament life at risk here. And it runs out clean, and I double up again. And like, now I have some chips. Now I have some chips on this table, and I'm the guy that cannot lose a hand, right? So there's like, everyone's excited for me, this recreational player who's like going on a run and has all these chips in front of him, and like the dynamic of the table changed quite a bit. So the last hand I want to talk about is, well, we'll get into this in great detail in the deep dive and maybe in some future episodes, but now I've got chips. Everyone's like excited for me. I think it was the next orbit. I'm in the big blind, and it goes open, call, which was very rare to get 3 players in a pot before it got to the big blind. And I look down at 4-2 of hearts. And I'm like, I got some chips for 1 big blind. I could make some surprising straight flushes or 2 pairs here. I got to close the action. Let's just see flop. So I call. And bear in mind, again, tightest player at the table by like a factor of 15. The flop comes 6-10-6. There's the small blind player checks. So I check, under the gun checks, middle position checks. Maybe that was 4 or 5 players. I don't remember how it went. Nobody bets. We go to the turn. It's a 10. So 2 6s and 2 10s on the board. And I can just, it feels like very likely that if the small blind checks here, no one else has a 6. And if someone had a 10, I think they would have just put a little bet out on a previous street because they don't want to see any overcards. So I think this is a good spot. And I had preserved the ability to do this by on the previous street when the 6-10-6 came out. I really was like, like I've got some 6s. I'm in the big blind. Like maybe I have a 6 here, and checked. So when the 10 comes out, small blind checks, and I really just like think about it. And like I'm trying to choose the perfect amount. Like if I had a 6, like what would I use for value? And so I lead for about 70% pot, as if I like really don't want to miss this chance. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. First person tanks forever, folds, fold. They all fold. And they're like, oh, well, this guy, he's got an overpair or he's got a 10 or like, I'd only ever had hands at that point. And they're all joking about this, like, tight knit recreational player who's like, I guess he's got it. And so I roll over the 4-2 and like, the whole table just gets quiet. The whole table just like doesn't have a word to say at that point. And like for the next 2 hands, you could just tell people were like, okay, like what is this guy doing? I thought I had him all figured out. Now he's got all these chips, and it really, like I say, it really did kind of change the dynamic at the table. And then I won like 3 out of the next 5 hands, bluffing well, value betting well, taking check call lines with value hands when it suited my opponent's range, and just like getting paid and letting them do the betting and stuff like that. It was just that chapter was phenomenal. And it was all because of this kind of like meta game. Yeah.
It's funny how people at the table, their first impression of you is the impression that they continue to have, even though circumstances can change. You were extraordinarily tight, but you had so few chips.
Right.
You were forced to be extraordinarily tight. But in their minds, you're just this really tight recreational player.
Yes.
So now you have chips, you're opening up your range, but it's really hard for them to catch up to that fact that you're not that extraordinarily nitty recreational player that they had you pegged as from the beginning.
And I have to give a shout out to RecPoker Crew member and pro player Mark Zane. So Mark was down there at the same time that I was down there. We ate dinner together on break quite a few times. Mark was very generous with his time and his advice on how to approach spots in the main event, and like playing small ball more, 3-betting less, making hands. It really helped me. It really helped me kind of shape how I approach some of these hands. And so I was texting with them on the morning of day 4, which is when the money bursts, when the bubble bursts and you make the money. And Kevin Mathers had come over and said like, "Oh, good luck, Jim," that sort of thing. And he'd asked a question about rec poker. And so the table kind of knew that I was a recreational player and that but also like that I knew people in the industry. And so I was kind of really leaning into the whole weak, tight player. And like I told them that I folded pocket jacks to 1 raise before the money burst and this, that, and they're like, "Oh, stop talking. Like, you're not doing yourself any favors there." And I was joking with Mark, like, I'm really leaning into this tight, weak image. I can't wait for the bubble to burst so I can start like unloading on these guys. Because my whole attitude was make the money, I had like 20 bigs or something. Make the money, and then I don't care about laddering up. Ladders are for playgrounds at this point. Like let's build up a stack. I don't care 15 to 17.5, 17.5 to 20. Like that's just not that big a difference. And I had enough chips that I could afford to lose some hands. It's like when you've only got 7 to 12 big blinds, like laddering matters more in a way, because you that's really all that you can do. When you've got more chips, like you can actually accumulate a stack, you can lose some pot, and still ladder and get tighter when you're short. So
laddering becomes more important as the ladders get a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, you were certainly more involved with laddering later on.
I definitely was. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Because my stack was a lot shorter.
They happen more frequently too, right? Like I forget how many people have to bust between that 15 to 17.5, but it's more than 100, right? It's
it's a few hundred players.
Yeah. So I mean, it's hard to do it. Curiosity about because you mentioned the bubble. I know maybe we got to wrap this up soon, but were you that bubble? It lasted a decent amount of time, but maybe not as long as it could have or should have. And I think you made a note when I was following along on Twitter. At least you were kind of aware, at least the room was aware of like the kinds of hands that were kind of getting it in the middle.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about, I don't know if you've seen it after the fact or if you knew it during play, but that the actual bubble hand that we all saw, which wasn't aces versus kings hands, but it was for piles and piles and piles of chips.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a 7-bet all in situation, more than 120 big blinds stacks getting it in. Were you aware of that happening? And yeah, go ahead.
Well, we weren't aware of the pre-flop dynamics of the hands, but so if folks are wondering, so the way it works is when you're 4 from the money, they go hand for hand in the tournament area. And what they do, so every table plays one hand. And what they do is if at any point during that hand, there's an all-in and a call, they just stop the action. No one reveals their cards. You don't deal out the rest of the hand. And you just like wait until all the other tables are finished. And then it's like, okay, we're 3 from the money and there are 2 all-in hands in this round. Then the camera crew goes over to that table and they're like, reveal the hands and let's play the turn in the river. And then you find out if someone busted or not. And then you move on to the next hand. So that happened. And then it's like one person busted. I was like, all right, well, now we're 2 from the money. Let's play a shuffle up and deal. And so we play every table plays one hand. And it's like, okay, now there's 3 players that are all in. Let's go through those hands. And like only one person busted. I was like, all right, well, now we're 1 from the money, shuffle up and deal. And you're all just like, let's just find out. Let's end this agony. And so we were 1 from the money and there were 6 all in hands on that one. And it was like,
this is going to happen now.
Yeah, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
Do you think that the reason for that is because people know that the bubble gets paid $10,000?
I think that's kind of like,
that was so bizarre that there was only 2, and then maybe there was 3, and then there was 2, and then now there's 1 person to go, and there's 6 all-ins.
Honestly, it might have factored in a little, but most of these hands are aces versus kings. Mm-hmm. Of all the hands that we saw, almost all of them were aces versus kings.
I watched all of them. I saw that we had ace queen versus ace 5.
Yeah, there was an ace king. There was one TJ Reid, who's a buddy of mine, a writer.
And ODB Baker, one of the David Bakers had like ace queen and called it off versus a jam.
TJ had a huge stack, and so he opened every hand pre-bubble and won 4 out of the first 5 hands just because no one was going to tangle with them until someone shoved on him with ace king for their last 4 big blinds, and he called with 8-3 suited because that was the hand that he'd opened with, and he flopped trip 8s and sent that guy home, and that's the guy that burst the bubble. So he won, I think, a free seat next year.
It was that. Those were the.
Oh,
that
no,
was the
they
one
had
bubble
two.
one, and then the aces versus kings. That was the 7-bet all
There
in
was
one.
two.
Yeah, there were two that.
So that the one guy only got $7,500.
Right.
Which is
right.
like, and the other guy got 12, the equivalent of 12.5.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Yeah, it was a weird dynamic where you're
17,
splitting.
I don't know, 17.5. I guess he got
17.5.
17.5, which is like more than
than min cash.
If that was me, I would have quickly said to the guy, "We're chopping this, no matter what happens. We're not taking losing $5,000 on a high card. Like, let's just chop this."
Yeah. So that was crazy. So that dynamic is completely unique. But I would have folded kings. Yeah. I would have folded kings. Well, three hands in a row. Here's
my question. Since this is a forums, we talk strategy. I'm curious about this because I've been asking a lot of people. Okay, you've got one person at your table. It's the stone bubble of the main event. You have one person at your table who has like a 200 big blind stack, and they are opening every hand, and they are putting the screws to anyone who messes with them. And you're in the big blind. You have the second biggest stack at the table, 120 big blinds, and you get pocket kings. And this player has opened from the hijack.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me what your stone bubble of the main event folds to you, or no? It's been open from the hijack with this 200 big blind player. Now it comes to you in the big blind. Are you flatting?
Call.
You're flatting.
Yeah.
Kim, you're flatting?
Yeah.
Jim, you're flatting?
I'm flatting. And if I don't see a king and not an ace, then I'm not proceeding very far in the hand either.
So, okay, you flat. Let's go this because the actual flop was, because this didn't matter because they had got it all in at this point.
Yeah.
But the actual flop was 9-4 deuce rainbow.
Check
call.
Honestly, it's only check call dependent on the size. It's a check fold.
Yeah, I mean,
sometimes.
if it's normal
So
bet.
how much of your stack are you willing to sort of like say, my kings are probably good here. This guy's just messing around.
No, the player, very little, and here's why. Because that player is going to bomb turns and rivers, and you're going to lose a lot more of your stack. Or you're going to have to fold later anyway, and you're drawing to a king. And there's
you're not going to have to fold unless they overbet all in. If they're going to overbet all in, then you have to fold.
You don't know that he has aces.
I don't care.
All you did was call.
I don't care if he doesn't have aces. You think he can't have a set of fours there or a set of nines?
Oh, sure.
Or ace queen and an ace comes on the river after you've gotten it all in good.
But to Kim's point is you don't know at that time. And if there's normal betting, you got your 1/3 on the flop, you got your 2/3 on the turn, and then you got some bet on the river. How are you getting away from pocket kings there? Unless the guy goes ape shit crazy and bets, 2x pot or something.
I get away from kings like it's my job on that spot. And then the very next hand, I'll get it in with a worse hand than kings because it's not on the absolute bubble of the turn. Or if I had that player covered, it's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
But if they cover me, I'm not calling. I'm not putting chips in.
See, I think
it's
like the old adage of whether you're going to fold aces on the bubble. So
I would fold aces on the bubble.
Here's my thoughts on that. If you spent $10,000 to buy into this and it's half a buy-in that you're going to make, you never fold aces on the bubble. If you satellite it in for $215 and you're going to make, I don't know how many buy-ins now at 15,000, you can fold aces on the bubble.
Yeah.
Like it's just completely different scenario.
It'd be like 60 buy-ins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. No, listen, if someone, I folded jacks to a single raise in the hand for hand period. Someone opened in front of me. I was in the small blind and I could have just called and seen a flop and
but you didn't
hit a set of jacks.
You didn't have 20 big blinds, right?
No.
See, I think I am in the call down mode, but I'm going to be willing to put if there's no ace on this flop, I'm going to be willing to put at least half my stack with my kings and make them put me all in. But if they do, then I'm probably folding.
Right.
I can go down to like 20 to 30 big blinds.
And that would make total sense.
Right.
If you told me this player is not going to shove later in this hand, then I would happily try and win.
I mean, maybe
calling.
They are, but are they really? Because how do they know I don't have pocket nines?
They don't care. They don't care. They don't care.
They should care because I mean. To go from
in your dynamic, you have a huge stack as well. Okay,
right.
So that does change things. That does change things. Right. That does change things. Yes, I was thinking about in my specific spot. In my specific spot, I didn't have enough chips for them to care.
Right. Yeah.
So they would just
I am
blow
folding
me
jacks.
off.
I am folding jacks. I'm probably folding kings. If I don't have enough chips for anyone to care, then I better just get out of the way.
But yeah, you're right. If you're second stack and you're up against big stack who's been very aggressive, then yes, I think that you can give yourself a couple streets and see if they don't pull the trigger.
Yeah, and I think if you choose to 3-bet there with kings, then you have to be which is also I think that's legitimate. You're doing it against a player who's opening every time, and you're like, I actually have a hand this time.
Yep.
But you're gonna have to really think about what you're doing if you get 4-bet.
At the end of day 3. I had just been moved to a new table. I had no reads on this table at all. And there is an hour to go before day 4. And I have enough chips now that I can fold to the money. I know the money's going to come tomorrow morning, and I have 30 big blinds, and I can just fold to the money. But I get dealt pocket kings in the small blind. Open in front, call on the button. I'm going to be out of position post flop. I'm not going to make the nuts unless there's a king on the board. But I 3-bet because it's very strong. This is the prototypical 3-betting for value hand because you also benefit from protection. And while both players were, you guys will make fun of me for this for the rest of my life, and you should. While both players were considering whether they were going to call it or not, I was like,
I ordered a beer.
I said to myself, if they call, I kind of hope there's an ace on the flop so I can just get away from this hand out of position. So they both folded, and I picked up a decent little pot. But it was going to be hard for me to win that hand out of position, even against a calling range. Because is the board 9-4-2? Do they have 9s or 4s? Is the board 8-7-5? Did they have 8-7?
How close were you to the bubble?
At that point, we were 35 more people to go. And I just was not
close. It's pretty close in that big event.
Yeah, because you've got a lot of tables.
You could, one thing you could do there is just shove. If you're that I think is the, if you want to lower your variance, that's the,
because you're only getting called by exactly aces.
Yeah, and maybe ace king, but that's great.
But I'll be honest with you guys, my mentality was not to maximize my EV. Hardly at any point in this tournament was I really trying.
Yeah, but I think that actually, it's not even about EV in that moment. That's one of those ICM Darrow Kearney things where you actually take the shoving line to lower your variance. So
we should probably wrap this up.
Yeah, we are. We're
now we're getting down the rabbit hole.
Because and we've got the deep dive to do at some point.
Yeah, that's right. So we will dig into more of this.
But before we go, and I know this is going to come out after the main event has played out, but we're recording this when we've just reached 9. Who do you guys like? I will go first. I like Lena 900. I think his presence at the table is amazing. I really like the way he plays. He seems so in the moment all the time.
You can ask.
He's my horse.
Yeah, same. You can ask. You can ask a couple of my friends. I saw his name pop up in the top 20 list on day 6, and I said he's going to win. He's going to win. because
Wow.
he's that good.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's
Rob,
very
do you have a horse in this race?
I don't even know who's playing. As soon as you got busted out, I lost all interest.
Yeah. I must admit it's the same for me. I
I'm
busted
just
on
watching
Thursday.
it.
I
Oh.
busted Thursday night. Friday night, I took the red eye home. I got home Saturday afternoon. Sunday, I was at a wedding for a friend out of town, so I stayed at their place on Sunday night. It's now Monday. I've been home for like 3 days. I've only slept in my own bed once. I have not opened Twitter or seen a moment of poker, like
Well, it
basically
starts
since
tomorrow
then.
at 6
Yeah.
p.m.
Well, I know
on
where I'll
Poker Go.
be.
You can
I
watch
can't
it.
wait to check it out. But it was a dream come true. It was a phenomenal experience. So if I guess we should spoil the ending. So I ended up taking, I busted in 210th place,
Out of
which was
10,000,
That's
10,012
10,012
players.
That's fantastic.
It was a
That was
great
absolutely
run.
fantastic. Yeah.
And I had a target in mind, the $60,000. So I made $60,000, most of which I'm going to share with the 35 folks that each took 1 to 2% of me. But I get to keep a little over 30% of that myself. I'm buying a car with it. My car broke down before I left for Vegas, and I already had this kind of circles. Like if I do pretty well down here, I know exactly what I'm going to spend this money on. And you know, I got it in with pocket queens against ace 10, like a dream spot with my last 16 big blinds. And I was not close to a ladder. We had just hit the 60K at 224, and it wasn't 70K until like 156 or something like that. It was like a quarter of the field still had to bust before we got to the next ladder. And so it was as close to painless, honestly, as it could be. I'd hit my threshold. I'd gotten the Jeff Platt interview. I made day 5 dinner break, and I busted like far from the pay jump, getting it in good. You just don't get to draw it up any better than that.
What did Norm call you? A sandwich eating
Hoser.
sandwich eating hoser?
That was Barry. I heard Norm took a shot at me too. I haven't actually heard that portion of the interview yet. But yeah, Barry Carter put out a tweet saying that he'd invested in a bunch of pros and authors and like great GTO minds, and the only horse he had left was this sandwich eating hoser.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So there was a lot of
great.
hashtag sandwich eating hoser responses on Twitter, which was super fun. And if folks want, I'd encourage you to go back to at RecPoker Jim, my Twitter feed from each day that I played is a pretty entertaining exchange between my feelings about the day and then a lot of other people like coming along for the journey and sharing their thoughts. And I think you'd get a kick out of it.
A fantastic ride.
Yeah, thank you.
I had 3 days of using Twitter more than I have all year.
Yeah,
same. I don't log in very often, but I was like every morning I was like, what's happening?
Yeah, it was a dream come true, and I never thought I would reach that depth in the main event. So I'm very proud of myself, but I know how lucky I got to be there, and very grateful for all the support from RecPoker and my friends and supporters along the way. I haven't really stopped smiling since. I know that'll come as a surprise to a lot of you. But yeah, the smile has been pretty permanently fixed on there. So I just can't wait to see what happens next. And if you're a new listener, thanks for tuning in. And remember, you can always get a free month of premium membership here at RecPoker just by supporting your local food bank. So get involved, and thanks for your support. And I'm looking forward to breaking some of these down in the deep dive, Chris. This is going to be
that'll be fun.
We're going to have a lot of fun with this. I mean, come on. Main event, man. All right. Well, Chris Jones, Kim Kilroy, Rob Washam, thanks to you for lending your time. Thanks to the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino for their support. All our premium members and all our listeners at home. We couldn't do it here without you on the RecPoker podcast. So we'll catch up with you soon. Thanks for tuning in.